Brandenburg-Prussia is the historiographic denomination for the early modern realm of the Brandenburgian Hohenzollerns between 1618 and 1701. Based in the electorate of Brandenburg, the main branch of the Hohenzollern intermarried with the branch ruling the Duchy of Prussia, and secured succession upon the latter's extinction in the male line in 1618. Another consequence of the intermarriage was the incorporation of the lower Rhenish principalities of Cleves, Mark and Ravensburg after the Treaty of Xanten in 1614. The 30 Years' War was especially devastating. The Elector changed sides 3 times, and as a result Protestant and Catholic armies swept the land back and forth, killing, burning, seizing men and taking the food supplies. Upwards of half the population was killed or dislocated. Berlin and the other major cities were in ruins, and recovery took decades. By the Peace of Westphalia, which ended the 30 Years' War in 1648, Brandenburg gained Minden and Halberstadt. Also the succession in Farther Pomerania and the Duchy of Magdeburg, with the Treaty of Bromberg, concluded during the Second Northern War. The electors were freed of Polish vassalage for the Duchy of Prussia, and gained Lauenburg, Bartau and Draheim. The Treaty of Saint-Germain-en-Laye expanded Brandenburgian Pomerania to the Lower Oder. The second half of the 17th century laid the basis for Prussia to become one of the great players in European politics later on. The emerging Brandenburg-Prussian military potential, based on the introduction of a standing army in 1653, was symbolized by the widely noted victories in Warsaw and Fehmarn and by the Great Sleigh Drive. Brandenburg-Prussia also established a navy and German colonies in the Brandenburger Gold Coast and Arguin. Frederick William, known as the Great Elector, opened Brandenburg-Prussia to large-scale immigration of mostly Protestant refugees from all across Europe, most notably Huguenot immigration following the Edict of Potsdam. Frederick William also started to centralize Brandenburg-Prussia's administration and reduced the influence of the estates. In 1701, Frederick III, Elector of Brandenburg, succeeded in elevating his status to king in Prussia. This was made possible by the Duchy of Prussia's sovereign status outside the Holy Roman Empire of the German nation, and approval by the Habsburg Emperor and other European royals in the course of forming alliances for the War of the Spanish Succession and the Great Northern War. From 1701 onward, the Hohenzollern domains were referred to as the Kingdom of Prussia, or simply Prussia. Legally, the personal union between Brandenburg and Prussia continued until the dissolution of the Holy Roman Empire in 1806. However, by this time, the emperor's overlordship over the empire had become a legal fiction. Hence, after 1701, Brandenburg was de facto treated as part of the Prussian kingdom. Frederick and his successors continued to centralize and expand the state, transforming the personal union of politically diverse principalities typical for the Brandenburg-Prussian era into a system of provinces subordinate to Berlin. Establishment under John Sigismund. The Margraviate of Brandenburg had been the seat of the main branch of the Hohenzollerns, who were prince-electors in the Holy Roman Empire, since 1415. In 1525, by the Treaty of Krakow, the Duchy of Prussia was created through partial secularization of the state of the Teutonic Order. It was a vassal of the Kingdom of Poland and was governed by Duke Albert of Prussia, a member of a cadet branch of the House of Hohenzollern. On behalf of her mother Elizabeth of the Brandenburgian Hohenzollern, Anna Maria of Brunswick-Kallenberg became Albert's second wife in 1550. And bore him his successor Albert Frederick. In 1563, the Brandenburgian branch of the Hohenzollern was granted the right of succession by the Polish crown. Albert Frederick became Duke of Prussia after Albert's death in 1568. His mother died in the same year, and thereafter he showed signs of mental disorder. Because of the Duke's illness, Prussia was governed by Albert's nephew George Frederick of Hohenzollern and Spark-Jägersdorf. In 1573, Albert Frederick married Marie Leonore of Dulwich-Cleves-Berg, with whom he had several daughters. In 1594, Albert Frederick's then 14-year-old daughter Anna married the son of Joachim Frederick of Hohenzollern-Brandenburg, John Sigismund. The marriage ensured the right of succession in the Prussian duchy as well as in Cleves. Upon George Frederick's death in 1603, the regency of the Prussian duchy passed to Joachim Frederick. Also in 1603, the Treaty of Guerra was concluded by the members of the House of Hohenzollern, ruling that their territories were not to be internally divided in the future. The electors of Brandenburg inherited the Duchy of Prussia upon Albert Frederick's death in 1618. But the duchy continued to be held as a fief under the Polish crown until 1656, since John Sigismund had suffered a stroke in 1616 and as a consequence was severely handicapped physically as well as mentally. His wife Anna ruled the Duchy of Prussia in his name until John Sigismund died of a second stroke in 1619, aged 47. George William, 1619 to 1640. From 1619 to 1640, George William was Elector of Brandenburg and Duke of Prussia. He strove, but proved unable to break the dominance of the electorate of Saxony in the Upper Saxon circle. The Brandenburg-Saxon antagonism rendered the defense of the circle ineffective, and it was subsequently overrun by Albrecht von Wallenstein during the 30 Years' War. While George William had claimed neutrality before, the presence of Wallenstein's army forced him to join the Catholic imperial camp in the Treaty of Königsberg and accept garrisons. When the Swedish Empire entered the war and advanced into Brandenburg, George William again claimed neutrality. Yet Gustavus Adolphus of Sweden compelled George William to join Sweden as an ally by occupying substantial territory in Brandenburg-Prussia and concentrating an army before the town walls of Berlin. George William did not conclude an alliance, but granted Sweden transit rights, 2 fortresses and subsidies. Consequently, Roman Catholic armies repeatedly ravaged Brandenburg and other Hohenzollern lands. The Great Elector, Frederick William, 1640–1688. During the 30 Years' War, George William was succeeded by Frederick William, born 1620, who became known as the Great Elector. The character of the young elector had been stamped by his Calvinist nurturer Calcum, a long stay in the Dutch Republic during his Grand Tour, and the events of the war, of which a meeting with his uncle Gustavus Adolphus of Sweden in Pomerania was among the most impressive. Conclusion of the 30 Years' War. Frederick William took over Brandenburg-Prussia in times of a political, economical and demographic crisis caused by the war. Upon his succession, the new elector retired the Brandenburgian army, but had an army raised again in 1643–44. Whether or not Frederick William concluded a truce and neutrality agreement with Sweden is disputed. While a relevant 1641 document exists, it was never ratified and has repeatedly been described as a falsification. He established the growth of Brandenburg-Prussia. At the time, the forces of the Swedish Empire dominated northern Germany, and along with her ally France, Sweden became guarantee power of the Peace of Westphalia in 1648. The Swedish aim of controlling the Baltic Sea by establishing dominions on the coastline thwarted Frederick William's ambitions to gain control over the Oder estuary with Stettin in Pomerania. The Brandenburgian margraves had long sought to expand northwards, connecting landlocked Brandenburg to the Baltic Sea. The Treaty of Grimnitz guaranteed Brandenburgian succession in the Duchy of Pomerania upon the extinction of the local House of Pomerania, and would have come into effect by the death of Pomeranian Duke Boguslaw XIV in 1637. By the Treaty of Stettin, however, Boguslaw XIV had also effectively handed over control of the duchy to Sweden, who refused to give in to the Brandenburgian claim. The Peace of Westphalia settled for a partition of the duchy between Brandenburg and Sweden, who determined the exact border in the Treaty of Stettin. Sweden retained the western part including the Lower Oder, while Brandenburg gained the eastern part. Frederick William was dissatisfied by this outcome, and the acquisition of the whole Duchy of Pomerania was to become one of the main goals of his foreign policy. In the Peace of Westphalia, Frederick William was compensated for Western Pomerania with the secularized bishoprics of Halberstadt and Minden and the right of succession to the, likewise secularized Archbishopric of Magdeburg. With Halberstadt, Brandenburg-Prussia also gained several smaller territories: the Lordship of Derenburg, the County of Regenstein, the Lordship of Klettenberg and the Lordship of Lora. This was primarily due to French efforts to counterbalance the power of the Habsburg Emperor by strengthening the Hohenzollern. And while Frederick William valued these territories lower than Western Pomerania, they became step-stones for the creation of a closed, dominant realm in Germany in the long run. Already before the war, the population density and wealth in the electorate had been low compared to other territories of the empire, and the war had destroyed 60 towns, 48 castles and about 5,000 villages. An average of 50% of the population was dead. In some regions only 10% survived. The rural population, due to deaths and flight to the towns, had dropped from 300,000 before the war to 75,000 thereafter. In the important towns of Berlin, Cologne and Frankfurt and der Oder, the population drop was 1/3 and 2/3, respectively. Some of the territories gained after the war were likewise devastated. In Pomerania, only 1/3 of the population survived, and Magdeburg, once among the wealthiest cities of the empire, was burned down with most of the population slain. Least hit were the Duchy of Prussia, which was only peripherally involved in the war, and Minden. Despite efforts to resettle the devastated territories, it took some of them until the mid-18th century to reach the pre-war population density. Cow War. In June 1651, Frederick William broke the provisions of the Peace of Westphalia by invading Jülichburg, bordering his possessions in Cleves Mark at the lower Rhine River. The Treaty of Xanten, which had ended the War of the Jülich Succession between Brandenburg and the Count Palatines in 1614, had partitioned the once united duchies of Jülich-Clevesburg among the belligerents, and Jülichburg was since ruled by the Catholic Counts of Palatinate Neuburg. After the 30 Years' War, Wolfgang William, Count Palatine of Neuburg, disregarded a 1647 agreement with Frederick William which had favored the Protestants in the duchies, while Frederick William insisted that the agreement be upheld. Besides these religious motives, Frederick William's invasion also aimed at territorial expansion. The conflict had the potential to spark another international war since Wolfgang William wanted to have the still not demobilized Army of Lorraine, which continued to operate in the region despite the Peace of Westphalia, to intervene on his side, and Frederick William sought support of the Dutch Republic. The latter, however, followed a policy of neutrality and refused to aid Frederick William's campaign, which was furthermore opposed by the imperial estates as well as the local ones. Politically isolated, Frederick William aborted the campaign after the Treaty of Cleves negotiated by imperial mediators in October 1651. The underlying religious dispute was only solved in 1672, while military confrontations were avoided and the Brandenburg-Prussian army was primarily occupied with stealing cattle. It considerably lowered Frederick William's reputation. Standing army. Due to his wartime experiences, Frederick William was convinced that Brandenburg-Prussia would only prevail with a standing army. Traditionally, raising and financing army reserves was a privilege of the estates. Yet Frederick William envisioned a standing army financed independently of the estates. He succeeded in getting the consent and necessary financial contributions of the estates in a Landtag decree of 26 July 1653. In turn, he confirmed several privileges of the knights, including tax exemption, assertion of jurisdiction and police powers on their estates, and the upholding of serfdom. Initially, the estates' contributions were limited to 6 years. Yet, the Frederick William obliged the estates to continue the payments thereafter and created a dedicated office to collect the contributions. The contributions were confirmed by the estates in 1662, but transformed in 1666 by decree from a real estate tax to an excise tax. Since 1657, the towns had to contribute not soldiers, but monetary payments to the army, and since 1665, the estates were able to free themselves from contributing soldiers by additional payments. The initial army size of 8,000 men had risen to 25,000 to 30,000 men by 1688. By then, Frederick William had also accomplished his second goal, to finance the army independently of the estates. By 1688, these military costs amounted to considerable 1,500,000 thalers, or half of the state budget, ensuring a solid financial basis for the army, undisturbed by the estates, was the foremost objective of Frederick William's administrative reforms. He regarded military success as the only way to gain international reputation. Second Northern War. The Swedish invasion of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth in the following year started the Second Northern War. Frederick William offered protection to the Royal Prussian towns in the Treaty of Rinsk, but had to yield Swedish military supremacy and withdraw to his Prussian duchy. Pursued by Swedish forces to the Prussian capital, Frederick William made peace and allied with Sweden, taking the Duchy of Prussia and Ermland as fiefs from Charles X Gustav of Sweden in the Treaty of Königsberg in January 1656. The alliance proved victorious in the Battle of Warsaw in June, enhancing the Elector's international reputation. Continued pressure on Charles X Gustav resulted in him conceding full sovereignty in Ducal Prussia and Ermland to Frederick William by the Treaty of Lebia in November to ensure the maintenance of the alliance. The Treaty of Radnat, concluded in December by Sweden and her allies, further awarded Greater Poland to Brandenburg-Prussia in case of a victory. When the anti-Swedish coalition, however, gained the upper hand, Frederick William changed sides when Polish King John II Casimir Vasa confirmed his sovereignty in Prussia, but not in Ermland. In the Treaty of Wellor-Bromberg in 1657, the duchy would legally revert to Poland if the Hohenzollern dynastic line became extinct. Hohenzollern sovereignty in the Prussian duchy was confirmed in the Peace of Oliva, which ended the war in 1660. Brandenburg-Prussian campaigns in Swedish Pomerania did not result in permanent gains. Dutch and Scanian wars. In 1672, the Franco-Dutch War broke out, with Brandenburg-Prussia involved as an ally of the Dutch Republic. This alliance was based on a treaty of 1669, and resulted in French occupation of Brandenburg-Prussian Cleves. In June 1673, Frederick William abandoned the Dutch alliance and concluded a subsidy treaty with France, who in return withdrew from Cleves. When the Holy Roman Empire declared war on France, Brandenburg-Prussia again changed sides and joined the imperial forces. France pressured her ally Sweden to relieve her by attacking Brandenburg-Prussia from the north. Charles XI of Sweden, dependent on French subsidies, reluctantly occupied the Brandenburgian Uckermark in 1674, starting the German theatre of the Scanian War. Frederick William reacted promptly by marching his armies from the Rhine to northern Brandenburg, and encountered the rear of the Swedish army, which was in the process of crossing a swamp, in the Battle of Fehrbellin. Though a minor skirmish from a military perspective, Frederick William's victory turned out to be of huge symbolic significance. The Great Elector started a counter-offensive pursuing the retreating Swedish forces through Swedish Pomerania. Polish King John III Sobieski planned to restore Polish suzerainty over the Duchy of Prussia, and for this purpose concluded an alliance with France on the 11th of June 1675. France promised assistance and subsidies, while Sobieski in turn allowed French recruitment in Poland, Lithuania, and promised to aid Hungarian rebel forces who were to distract the Habsburgs from their war against France. For this plan to work out, Poland-Lithuania had to first conclude her war against the Ottoman Empire, which French diplomacy, despite great efforts, failed to achieve. Furthermore, Sobieski was opposed by the papacy, by Polish gentry who saw the Ottomans as the greater threat, and by Polish magnates bribed by Berlin and Vienna, in a Polish Catholic opposition to an intervention on the Protestant Hungarian rebels' side added to the resentments. Thus, while Treaty of Jaworno ended the Polish-Ottoman War in 1676, Sobieski sided with the emperor instead, and the plan for a Prussian campaign was dropped. By 1678, Frederick William had cleared Swedish Pomerania and occupied most of it, with the exception of Rügen, which was held by Denmark-Norway. This was followed by another success against Sweden, when Frederick William cleared Prussia of Swedish forces in what became known as the Great Sleigh Drive. However, when Louis XIV of France concluded the Dutch War by the Nijmegen treaties, he marched his armies east to relieve his Swedish ally, and forced Frederick William to basically return to the status quo ante bellum by the Treaty of Saint-Germain-en-Laye. Though the Scanian War resulted only in minor territorial gains, attaching a small strip of the Swedish Pomeranian right bank of the lower Oder to Brandenburg-Prussian Pomerania, the war resulted in a huge gain of prestige for the Elector.